Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Why is the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services stockpiling drugs against radiation poisoning? What happened on the banks of the Pascagoula River in Mississippi on October 11, 1973? How do you really help a ghost in distress? And I think before Ben kicks in, I'm going to correct something that our very dear friend, Craig Pelletier...
I think he corrected himself on the air, but...
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, he did.
Now, he's been on the air for 36 hours with Autumn Fest. I can certainly understand. But do not check your brain at the door. You will need it when you listen to this show.
Unless you walk outside.
He's the guy who wrote last night that people should get college credit for listening to this show. One of the listeners.
Yeah, well, that was an email from 2 years ago. That could have changed.
Yeah, we may become dumber since then.
All right. Hello there. Welcome to the 493rd edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. I'm Ben, and those pretty scientific questions came from my co-host and partner in the paranormal, my dad. So this evening we bring you a kind of paranormal variety show. And with news items that we rarely have a chance to discuss, and some letters as well from our giant pile of them in our basement. And you are certainly welcome to call in locally. The number is 401-766-1240 or 800-449-1240 from anywhere in the U.S. or Canada. So let's get right down to it.
Okay, now this is a little bit unusual for us. We usually do not get into conspiracy theories, but this kind of made me wonder. This is a press release that I received from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, dear old Catherine Sebelius' department, and it has to do with the HHS stockpiling products to treat acute radiation syndrome. Now, that's not a bad idea. It's always a good idea to be prepared. But I'm wondering, do they know something we don't know? Now, obviously, there's always the danger of terrorism and these terrible things that have happened to our country in the last decade or so, and longer. And I'm wondering really why Homeland Security isn't handling this, but I suppose it does make sense. And I'm not questioning it. It's just it sort of made me wonder, because we're not conspiracy theorists here, but are they expecting something bigger than a terrorist attack? Because I'm thinking of some of the suspicions that I personally have about the possibility of, and I hate to say it, some sort of warfare over the next few years. This is not some
Or it could be some leftover radiation from somewhere else. I mean, there's all sorts of radiation.
There are all sorts of radiation. It just struck me as a little bit odd, so I'm not going to read it or go into it. And I know it is best
just
to be
pointing
prepared.
it out.
I'm not criticizing. It just struck something inside me that's a little odd.
Right. All
right, so back to our more normal, abnormal discussions here on the show. We have some messages that we have stuff that goes back to 2009 and some stuff that came in yesterday. One of those was coming in on Facebook this morning, and Ben can read the first one there. It's from who is it? Somebody in Salem, Mass.
Yeah, Chuck from Salem. He goes on to say, I heard your show last night and found it fascinating, especially when you answered the question about what multiverse does to faith in God. You said it enhances it, and everything has to keep growing instead of just continuing, including God. So that is really mind-expanding. But let me ask you this. If all possibilities already exist in the multiverse, how can it keep expanding? Wouldn't there have to be new worlds being created all the time?
Okay, well, it's a very good question. And the question upon which this question is based was read, as I say, last night on our CBS edition, and we do get into lots of things that people might not associate with the paranormal on this paranormal show. A lot of people think that when they first see it that we talk about ghost hunting and all this stuff that I consider mostly ridiculous. However, we do believe in the paranormal. I have seen it in ways that most people have not, over 43 years of experience in it, starting when I was studying for the priesthood. And that latter fact leads to many questions about God. People writing in. Many people don't like what I say because I don't agree with they blame me for not embracing their religious beliefs, and they figure I was in the seminary for many years and ought to toe the line. However, I do not. The question last night was based on our point of view that what we refer to as the multiverse is what pretty much everything is based on, our whole experience of reality, and particularly the paranormal, which is probably the most obvious manifestation of it. This comes from some ideas in some fringe areas of physics quantum mechanics particularly, that have been accepted by many, many physicists. And that is one particular idea called the multiple worlds interpretation, that what we see around us is not what we get. We are part of a large interactive system of parallel worlds or universes or realities in which, if you take them all as a whole, all possible outcomes, all possible pasts, all possible futures not only exist in a concrete way, but exist simultaneously. Hence, you can see someone who has died, and it's not their spirit, it's them. That's the idea. That started hitting me in the late 1970s when I was working on some pretty wild cases. So that's what this idea is based on. So the question last night was, what does this do to our idea of God? So the first question there to respond is, what is your idea of God? I very often will talk to people. I've even talked to people who say, "Oh, well, you're expressing heresy, false doctrine." And I say, and I'll listen to them and their ideas. And as one who has a theological education, I'll find heresy after heresy in what they're saying. So it really does come down, and a lot of the ancient fathers of the church admitted this and said it outright, that in the end it really comes down to you and God. That is where the line is drawn. That is where the rubber hits the road, to use cliches. That's what counts. So the question is, what do our multiverse ideas do to our idea of God? What do they do to our speech as well? In the matter of our ideas about God, we have a one-dimensional, or I'll say three-dimensional idea of God. God is some sort of cosmic vending machine at worst, and at best, some sort of old man with a white beard sitting in the sky, which I always found very interesting. And if you're a Christian, you believe that you've got perhaps the Trinity, which you probably don't understand. No one really does. And that brings in Jesus and the Holy Spirit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's really a two-dimensional God, I think, three-dimensional at most. What the multiverse idea does to this is, first of all, expand, I think, God's love. In other words, we were always taught, whether you went to Catholic school or any other kind of religious education, and especially if you were ever in the seminary, you were taught that the creation is the result of God's love. In particular, God's love for us. We I think, are rather arrogant in our setting of ourselves above all the rest of creation, which has created a lot of problems for our planet, but that's another story. So the issue here is, what if you have unbounded love, which is what God is supposed to have? You make an unbounded creation. You create all possible creations in this multiverse scenario. I think it fits perfectly with the whole idea of a very loving God. And then there was another dimension to the question last night, and that was, well, okay, if you got of God with unbounded love, how come there's such unbounded pain in the world? And this is the age-old question that everybody asks. Somebody dies they love, so they turn against God, or they don't pray anymore, if they even understand what that means, and this kind of thing. Well, that makes me sick. First of all, there is the possibility, I think, that and this is what Chuck's question from Salem gets into, maybe the whole of creation isn't created yet. Maybe God himself, if it's him, he, she, it, or them, I know that's not even relevant. Maybe God is still growing, still learning. Maybe God is all-loving, but hasn't grown completely yet. Now, that's very, very much, that is heretical, I guess, according to most established doctrines. But who came up with doctrines? People's interpretation, in my opinion. And if you point to the Bible, the translations are just awful, so who knows what it actually even said in the beginning. So this is where this question has come from. And Chuck's question gets down to that. If in the multiverse idea, you've already got all possible creations, everything is already there somewhere or somewhen, including God, how can things keep growing and expanding? Why don't they just keep continuing? How can this philosophy be squared with this idea? Well, I don't think there is a problem there. I think you can have all possible creations and things can keep growing because possibilities keep expanding. Many physicists who believe this will use the example, and I use it in my book, Turning Home, the example of a cup dropping. You're washing the dishes in the evening in the kitchen, and you're you have a cup in your hand and it's got soap on it and it slips and it falls down on the floor and breaks. Well, you have, according to classic quantum physics, another world being created. The world in which you continue washing dishes without breaking the cup continues, but the multiverse grows a little because you've created a world in which the cup broke. And this gets back to the old time paradox of what happens when you go back, and if you go back in time and you shoot your own grandfather, how could you be born? Well, that's not how it works. When you shoot the grandfather, according to this theory, what you're doing is creating another universe in which the grandfather is dead. The one in which you were born simply keeps going and expanding and expanding and expanding and expanding. And time really having no meaning. The question, what does this do to God? How can God keep growing or anything else if all these possibilities exist? The question has no meaning. The dichotomy has no meaning.
Well, I mean, it's like if there are infinite possibilities, that means everything can keep being created
well,
through different
that's
decisions.
True.
I mean, just because you're like, well, I mean, there's an infinite amount of things, how can things keep going? Well, it's like, well, it's infinite and can keep going.
Well, that's the word. Can you fill up infinity?
Well, no.
And we say no. So that answers the question.
Done.
The question is irrelevant.
Moving on.
Okay, there we are. So thank you, Chuck. A good question, though. The next one is from Petra in Steubenville, Ohio.
Ooh, all right. So Petra writes to us, "Hi, Paul and Ben. I really enjoy your show, but sometimes your answers are very unsatisfying. I am the kind of person ghosts come to for help. In other words, I keep running into situations where they contact me if I go to a place they are haunting. I feel a tap on the shoulder or a voice in my ear asking for help. You say they are not dead people, so who are they? I want direction, and I want to try to direct them toward the light, but just as often, I don't know how to advise them. Does this ever happen to you?"
Well, that's a complicated question, Petra. I think you are coming from the usual approach to the paranormal, and we will demonstrate that. We're speaking at the Lincoln Public Library on October 23rd, I believe at 7 p.m.
And she's from Ohio.
Well, hey, that's what do you think they have airplanes for? Well, no, I'm not saying that she, excuse me, personally should come, but I hope she can. Anyway, the point being that there is a certain point of view on the paranormal. Excuse me.
Would you like some water?
Thank you, son. I would appreciate that.
Okay.
A certain point of view on the paranormal that personifies the 19th century two-dimensional idea that we were talking about, and people look at God the same way they look at ghosts, really. They must be spirits of the dead because you went to their funeral and there they are. So that's really the only explanation people can think of. So this seems to be the framework from which you are writing to us, Petra. We don't believe they're dead because death cannot exist in the multiverse. It is simply impossible, because that's something of a paradox, because where you have a multiverse in which all possibilities are possible, how can you not have death? Well, of course, you go to people's funerals, your body wears out, leaves fall off trees, things of this kind. However, what's really happening here is that well, I use the analogy of an apartment house. You grow up in a large apartment house. Okay, thank you, Ben. You have never been outside of your apartment. It's very large, very spacious, and somehow a member of your family disappears. All right, they move out of the apartment. You don't realize that, and they perhaps move to another apartment in the building or out of the building completely. In your framework, they have disappeared. They have died. Perhaps you saw them lying on the couch. You didn't know what was happening. They were ill, and maybe they just went to the hospital or something like this. But you get the point. The point of view we have is very limited and is not good enough to explain reality. I think what's actually happening here when you are communicating with these entities, Petra, and some of them may be people, some of them may not. Everything is out there because all possibilities exist. You are dealing with actual people. Yes, and to answer your question, it has happened to me all the time. When I started realizing this in the late 70s and would be on paranormal cases, I would never ever try to communicate. That's a dangerous thing to try and do. But if you are in a quiet state and you encounter, I would refer to them as neighbors from some of these parallel realities. I think that's what they are. We're all a lot of us are in the same boat. Some are good, some are not so good, and some are neutral. I suppose, like we are. There is a certain realization that can occur. Some of them are not in good places. Some of them, like us, have problems. Like us, some of them have stresses, frustrations. They have issues. And this is what comes across when you have the 19th century idea that these are dead people with problems. Okay? I don't personally see the point in dying if you still have problems, but that's me. So I think if you perhaps see your way clear to perhaps expanding your mind to the point where you can see these different points of view and realize what it really is that I believe you're dealing with. And we could be wrong, I don't know. But we hear this all the time, that people change their attitudes toward what these are, that they're just people. They're not dead. They don't have to go to any light, because that's a dangerous thing to really do. And to simply send out compassion and an understanding mind, and they will respond to that. And as we respond to theirs, we often will feel loving presences. The point is that this multiverse is an open system. There's constant give and take. Energy comes and goes between worlds. That seems to be how it's organized. So that, I think, is what's happening to you. When you cannot communicate, the overlap of the worlds is not good enough. You sound like some sort of person, I would say, Ben, here, who is very open to this and can pick up these stimuli.
Well, I mean, it comes down to your frame of reference or your context or whatever.
It's easier if you see it our way. I hate to put it that way, because as I say, we could be wrong, but it's worked for me for more than 30 years, and it seems to work for Ben, and it really deepens your understanding of the whole thing.
It just makes more sense. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I grew up with this stuff, going to all your talks when I was like 6.
They don't know any
maybe
better.
I was indoctrinated.
Yes, perhaps. So you asked Petra, and that's our take on it. So let's pause for a little news item. We're going to do kind of a variety show tonight. Pascagoula, Mississippi, one of our opening questions had to do with that. What happened in Pascagoula, Mississippi in 1973? Well, this is, believe it or not, I found this on the one of the Newswire services, and you don't often see stories like this on that. Ben, if you'd like to
all right,
read that, or pick and choose, whichever.
Alrighty, let's start this off. So this was actually just a few days ago, about a week ago, actually, on October 10th, so that was last Monday. And it starts off saying Charles Hickson never regretted the notoriety that came his way after he told authorities he encountered an unidentified flying object and its occupants 40 years ago on the banks of the Pascagoula River. It looks like I'm saying Pasco.
Don't try and spell it.
Yeah, no. I mean, I'm reading it. It just looks so strange. Until his death in 2011, Hickson told his story to anyone who would listen. But Calvin Parker Jr., the other man present for one of the most high-profile UFO cases in American history, has never come to terms with what he still says was a visit with gray crab-clawed creatures from somewhere else.
Unless they came out of the river.
Crab-clawed creatures. Wow. Sounds like a Gary Larson cartoon. He says the encounter on October 11th, 1973, turned his life upside down. Quote, "This is something I really didn't want to happen," unquote, Parker told the Associated Press as the 40th anniversary of the encounter approached. Parker was unnerved by initial crush of unwelcome attention, with newsmen and UFO enthusiasts overrunning Walker Shipyard, where he and Hickson worked. He tried to dodge the spotlight for decades, moving frequently before returning to Mississippi's Gulf Coast in recent years. The incident made headlines. Sparked a wave of UFO sightings nationwide and became one of the most widely examined cases on record.
Can I just stop you there?
Yes.
Just for a comment. And you've heard this too. When we've interviewed people who have experienced UFO phenomena of this kind, particularly where it's the, encounters with actual beings and this kind of thing.
Yeah.
They always say, I didn't ask for this. I didn't want this to happen. I think that's an important point to bring out, because while there are a few who are publicity seekers and think they can make some money out of this, I don't know how. I've been doing this for 43 years.
There's ways to make niches in anything that
I suppose, yeah.
You do.
But for the most part, the witnesses we know would have echoed that we just don't didn't want this to happen.
Right. Sort of an air of humility.
All right. So I guess we'll take a break because I have no idea where we are because we're going 15 minutes later tonight. So you're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM in New England's beautiful Blackstone River Valley. Stay with us.
Hi, this is Romeo Berthium inviting you to join me every Saturday morning from 6 to 9 for The Saturday Show. This all-request program includes music, news, sports, weather, and all sorts of community announcements. And what a great way to start your weekend. Join me this Saturday morning.
ON Radio, ON Worldwide.
And just to remind you, we are, of course, adopting various charities, Ben and myself, and especially veterans charities. So you want to check out buildershelpingheroes.org. They're building a house locally right here in the area, Burrillville, Rhode Island, Harrisville, actually, to be specific, for the Kevin Dubois family. And Kevin is a Marine corporal who lost both his legs in Afghanistan on his second tour there. Wonderful, wonderful people, and they deserve this wonderful house that's being built by Builders Helping Heroes, Homes for Our Troops, and the Rhode Island Builders Association. Great folks. Also, we want to remind you of Canadian Veterans Advocacy for our Canadian cousins who have been standing by us in the war on terror since the beginning. And our good friend Mike Blaze has founded that group out of Ontario, and they do a lot of legislative lobbying on behalf of veterans in Canada. And you know what was done to our veterans here recently. I won't get into that, but you all know it, I hope. And being a veteran myself, I'm extremely upset about that. But some of the Canadian veterans have faced some legislative challenges as well. So they're both great charities, and also usacares.org as well. So check those out and help them if you can. Okay, let's get back to some of our communications here. We were talking about the Pascagoula UFO case from 1973 and the kinds of things that these people go through. And again, nobody asked for this to happen, and assuming that they are sincere people, and it really did. So,
alrighty. So continuing on. We're going to continue with the paragraphs after saying it's the most examined case on record. Skeptics ranged from the deputies who first interviewed the men to an author who sought to poke holes in the story, and Parker himself has had conflicting thoughts about whether he was visited by aliens or demons. Parker, now 58, 58, was 18 when he went fishing with Hickson on a tranquil Thursday night after work. As they dangled their lines without much luck, the two said a UFO with blue lights swooped down, and they told of a zipping noise made by the object. Hickson, then 42, said 3 creatures with leathery gray skin and crab-like claws. He thought they were robots. They took them by the forearms and levitated them aboard the craft. He said something that looked like a large floating eye appeared to examine him. Parker says he was conscious but paralyzed. And just flip the page here. They, quote, they gave me a thorough, and I mean thorough, examination to me, just like any doctor would, unquote, he said. And then they were back on the shore where it all began. The UFO was gone, and Parker said they tried to collect themselves. Hickson needed 3 shots of liquor from a bottle in his car to calm his nerves before deciding to report what happened. That doesn't really lend credence to his case now, does it?
He supposedly hadn't done anything like that before he had the sighting.
Right. At the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, the deputies initially suspected both men were drunk. There we go. Then Captain Glenn Ryder, who still works for the sheriff's office, said he laughed at the report, but met with the men. Parker and Hickson stuck to their story. After the formal interview, deputies left Hickson and Parker together in a room with a hidden tape recorder, hoping to catch them in a lie. Quote, me and the other investigator got up and left to let them talk, to see if they were going to say, well, we got them fooled, but they didn't. They were really concerned. On the tape, Hickson tells Parker, quote, it scared me to death too, son. You can't get over it in a lifetime. Jesus Christ have mercy, unquote. Quote, "I don't know what happened to them," unquote, said Ryder. I wasn't there with them, but I know you don't fake fear, and they were fearful. They were fearful. The next afternoon, the story was splashed across the front pages of newspapers in Pascagoula and Gulfport. Overnight, Pascagoula became a magnet for news reporters and UFO investigators. Widespread interest of UFOs began in the 1940s with an incident at Roswell, New Mexico, in which UFO enthusiasts believe the government got its hands on a crashed UFO and alien bodies. The government spent decades denying it, and still does. In the 1960s, interest flared anew with a series of reports, including the purported alien abduction of New Hampshire couple Betty and Barney Hill,
whose niece is on our show rather frequently.
Yeah, in 1961. The widespread attention of the Pascagoula encounter set off a new round of reports. In South Mississippi, hundreds of reports overwhelmed authorities in the 2 weeks after the Hickson-Parker encounter. There were hoaxes and humor too. A Long Beach, Mississippi taxi driver told police a being with pincers tapped on his window. A story he admitted later was fake. In Mobile, Alabama, television. What?
I think the phone's ringing.
Is it ringing? Oh, it is indeed. All right.
Okay, well, we'll you get the point on that case. Again, with these UFO cases, naturally, there's some healthy skepticism that has to be employed. However, when you have multiple witnesses, and I've been in cases, not UFO cases, but situations with multiple witnesses, 7 people in one case, then it really starts to become something you have to take a serious look at. And we have a caller.
Hello.
And welcome to Behind the Paranormal.
You also, nice to speak with you. You were talking about the universe, infinity, reality. Now, I'm thinking it's Columbus Day. Columbus perceived the Earth to be flat and fall off it.
Well, not...
That was his reality.
Well, that's kind of a myth, really.
Yeah. well, no, I understand what the lady's saying.
Right.
Reality can be whatever you perceive real to be.
So
it's kind of a deep thought.
It is. So somewhere and when, as we say in this multiverse, there really is a flat world. Otherwise, you would never be able to conceive of it.
But what is reality?
That's a good question.
I get deep in this and people laugh, but no one can really say much about it. But you brought up the subject today.
Yeah. Well, no, you're right. Now, I have to add a caveat to that, and that is that we have a responsibility, especially a personal responsibility, to deal with what we have and to keep our feet on the ground. And it can become a problem because as you develop, even spiritual, I think what's happening is that you're perceiving more and more worlds where you live. All right? And the thing to do is to do it in a balanced manner, and to experience it in a beneficial way, where you take from it the wisdom that you have in many lives and this sort of thing. And it's a variation, I suppose.
I'm sorry, I just have one more thing to comment. When I was a child, I used to bother my mother so much with this question. I said, well, if the universe goes on forever, is there anything behind it, and how far does it go? And she didn't want to talk about it because I drove her crazy with that question.
It intimidates people sometimes.
It does.
Yeah.
It's a deep thought, and it's just very interesting to me.
Well, very good. Very good. I'm glad you appreciate it.
All right.
I'm sure other people
thank
do.
you, and I'm enjoying your program.
Oh, good. Well, thank you for calling.
Okay.
Okay, very good. Okay, so let's move beyond UFOs here. This is from Francine in New York City. And I've marked off sections there.
Okay, Francine, New York City. So she is saying to us... Wait, where am I reading this?
See where it's marked in red.
It says answer, not question.
How hard can it be?
It says answer next to it.
No, that's her answer to my question.
Oh, all right. Unusual experiences are common in my family, she writes. But a few hours after my dad died, when my hard-of-hearing mom, daughter, and my dad's dog and I all heard him return to our house, that was one of the strangest. The dog, who had been whining, stopped and rushed to the kitchen, where we all heard the locked outer door open and close. We followed, never saw the ghost, but we all felt certain he was with us.
Isn't that interesting? They hear about this all the time. Now, here's an example of a multiversal experience. And you know, one thing I've noticed, there are two things in here that really drew my attention. One, dogs don't lie. They make mistakes.
In the heart of hearing
the wrong
mom.
tree kind of thing. The heart of hearing mom. And the other thing is that the more frequently you do something, the more paths, I suppose you could say, it makes in the multiverse. The more worlds in which you do it. Okay.
Right.
So I think that helps explain why you would hear somebody coming through the door as they would on an ordinary day, walking someplace, and you've just been to their funeral, you know. And this might continue for a long time. Getting into the electronic voice phenomena thing, the EVP thing, which is so popular among the ghost bunch, it is possible that you could get a recording, even if you didn't hear it with the naked ear, of this door opening and the footsteps and this kind of thing that this fellow did for all those years, because there are many, many worlds in which he did that and is still doing it, and they overlap very often. If the ducks are lined up in physics for that to occur. So I found that very interesting. But she immediately assumes it's a ghost.
Right.
Okay? You can call it that, but she immediately assumes it's the spirit of her father. I found that very interesting.
Well, I mean, he quote, died, unquote, so...
Yeah, so, like, what else could it be? It illustrates exactly what we've been talking about.
Indeed. So, shall I move on?
By all means.
All right, so she goes on to answer another question saying, paranormal events happened to my grandmother, mother, and myself in a relationship to each other and our kids. I heard my daughter calling me from a camp over 100 miles away, and later learned she had hurt her head and was in a short coma when I was hearing her call me. My mom always knew when something was wrong with me, even many years after I was married.
I find that interesting as well. Now, this is a very common thing to hear, that you are connected with a loved one, even though they are a great distance away geographically. How often do we hear this? That even if you're not in this field, it's a common thing to hear.
Oh yeah, I mean we even talked about this in my media criticism course.
Really?
So, yeah, well we were talking about Carl Jung, that's why.
Oh, okay. Well, he was a great psychologist, student of Freud, who thought
you'd
Freud
never know it though.
No, you'd never know. He decided Freud kind of had a lot of issues, and Carl Jung, the great fellow who came up with the idea of the collective unconscious, which is, I suppose, equivalent to the multiverse idea in a sense, or at least non-locality.
Right.
And he was interested in the paranormal. Lived until he died in the 1960s, right?
Yeah,
he was, pretty old, but he was around.
So, yeah. He did a lot.
Great psychologist. Yeah. So
good for him.
Anyway, so that's who Ben's referring to.
Right.
But yeah. No, it's extremely interesting. Very, very multiversal situation, and there you go. I mean, these people obviously are very sensitive. We usually use the word sensitive as meaning psychic. But what is psychic? How does it work? What is it? I think it's the ability to apprehend with your mind, or sometimes even your body, various parallel worlds. That's how you know stuff.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were finished. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead, sorry.
Alrighty, so moving on. When asked the question about further experiences, she says, my grandmother claimed her life was saved by an invisible wall in Russia. If she had not been stopped from proceeding straight ahead, she would have been killed when Cossack soldiers roared down the street mere minutes after she had been turned away.
Well, you know, that reminds me of many of the saints of both East and West. If you read their lives, now admittedly there's a certain amount of pious embellishments maybe sometimes, but the point of this statement being that you've got, I think, things that could be interpreted as psychic, many things that could be we might call multiversal, many experiences, bilocation, even flight are sometimes, and knowledge of things that are taking, remote viewing as we would call it today. Their lives are full of these things. In fact, we had a whole show on the paranormal lives of the saints. This isn't to say that it's not holy or a gift from God or anything like that. It's just to say that they had it. And I suppose whether it is a gift or not, or whether it is a good thing to have, depends on how it's used. So,
right.
Yeah. All right.
So moving on. What is next?
Ben, you mentioned the Roswell case in that UFO report, and I know we're kind of jumping around here tonight, but that's the beauty of a variety show, I suppose. This is an interesting report. in reference to Roswell.
Next we'll have Vaudeville Act. Paranormal Vaudeville
Well, you can do
Acts.
that.
Yeah, maybe. Tumbling and all that stuff. Alrighty, so we're going to go on here to the General's widow in Roswell. Captivating, incredible testimony recently obtained from an elderly widow of a highly placed U.S. Air Force general reveals that the Roswell crash of 1947 was, in fact, an extraterrestrial event. Her confession affirms that the true nature of the wreck has been shrouded in secrecy for decades, even from those at the highest levels of government. Her husband, General Harry N. Cordes? Is it Cordes?
Well, I don't know, but I don't know who it is. But
I don't know. I see the ES and I say Cordes.
I know he existed and that this is...
Anyway, he possessed top secret SCI clearance. Do you know what that is? 'Cause I don't.
SCI. I did at my age. I can't remember.
Special clearance ID. I don't know. And was uniquely positioned to be in the know. Quote,
I think
unquote.
it's a category of clearance.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know.
All right. And he was in the position to be in the know on such matters. Perhaps no other military man in history can lay claim to having been stationed at Roswell Army Airfield in July of 1947. Later, with Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, to have worked at Area 51, been employed by the CIA to have acted as Deputy Chief of Staff at Intelligence Headquarters for the Strategic Air Command, and still later to have led many intelligence functions at the Pentagon. The Cordes story is a telling one and leaves little doubt that what fell from the skies to the desert floor in New Mexico 6 decades ago was not from Earth. In 1947, Cordes was stationed at Roswell, or RAAF, as a radar operator. It was there that he met Rogine. Rogine? All these names are so strange to me.
Yeah.
His future wife. Rogine's father's cattle and sheep ranch was adjacent to the Roswell crash site. I think that's kind of romantic in a very strange way.
Yeah.
It is Rogine Cordes with whom this author has had extensive dialogue over several months. It's Rogine Cordes is the general's widow who felt compelled in the winter of her life to now tell all about what she and her husband knew about the Roswell crash and its history-making implications. See, now the thing I have about this is, how would she know?
That's what bothers me too. As I can't talk about half the stuff I did in the military. Never mind.
Yeah, I mean it's
something
like,
as classified as that.
Yeah, exactly. That's why it's like, why would she know? Usually they're not supposed to tell anybody anything.
Well, there are deathbed confessions. It doesn't make any difference anymore. So I mean, you do hear about that. For example, the British doctor who admitted that the famous 1936 or 37 photo of the Loch Ness Monster was actually faked.
Oh yeah, he did that on vacation or something.
But generally, secrets, military secrets, I once wrote an article for Yankee Magazine, and it was about the Scituate, Rhode Island, Chopmist Hill, to be specific, area, which the local listeners know about. And there were important things going on there during World War II that a lot of people still don't realize. The FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, our good friends, always had a radio monitoring station there that picked up critical information, without which we might have lost World War II. Now, I don't get into it on this show. History is not necessarily our bailiwick here.
But it is a variety show.
Well, that's true. But it's nothing paranormal, as far as I know.
Right.
But the point being that I talked with Thomas B. Cave, who was the commander of that facility, 2 weeks before he died, because I was writing an article for Yankee Magazine about this. And he still would not talk about things because they're still classified until 2069. People took their security responsibilities seriously. In my day, as I've said before, it was more false information and just keep them guessing, because I realized you really couldn't keep secrets as the information age, at least not to this degree, as the information age kept going on. But in any case, it does make me a little suspicious, but there's no reason to believe. I hear from other sources that is accurate, whatever the case may be. So,
well, we're gonna be extending our show for another 15 minutes to make up for the Autumn Fest closing ceremony. So we'll be right back after legal ID and some more legal stuff and some weather. So stay with us right here on Behind the Paranormal on ON 1240 Woonsocket Radio. Stay with us.
This is ON 1240, WOON Woonsocket.
This ON 1240 weather forecast is brought to you by the Thrifty Witch Consignment Shop in Bellingham at the Bellingham Marketplace right off Route 126 at 799 South Main Street. The Thrifty Witch features crystals, books, clothing, jewelry, furniture, home decor, and more, and they buy, sell, or trade. The Thrifty Witch Consignment Shop in Bellingham, Route 126. Call 508-876-2720.
Tonight, mostly cloudy skies, low temperature around 48. Tuesday's weather, partly sunny with a high near 69. Tuesday night, partly cloudy, low around 49. Wednesday, mostly cloudy with a high near 65. Thursday, partly sunny, high 68. Friday, mostly sunny, high near 64. Saturday, mostly sunny, high near 64. And Sunday, mostly sunny and a high near 61.
ON Radio.
Welcome back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben. I am Ben, and just across